Welcome back to another voyage through the void with Cryo Bay Logs. Tonight, we're drifting into the gritty, lived-in universe of the Expanse, where humanity has spread across the solar system but hasn't left behind its capacity for conflict, exploitation, or the desperate struggle for survival. In this vast darkness between worlds, stations become more than just structures of metal and ice. They become homes, battlegrounds, symbols of identity, and the very infrastructure upon which civilization beyond Earth depends. The Expanse presents us with a future that feels tangible. There are no warp drives or artificial gravity generators here. Instead, we find spin gravity, Epstein drives that make the outer planets accessible, and the constant reminder that space remains fundamentally hostile to human life. Every breath of air is manufactured, every drop of water precious beyond measure, and every cubic meter of habitable space represents an investment of resources and engineering that most of us can barely comprehend. In this universe, 3 stations stand out not just for their physical presence, but for their profound impact on the political, economic, and social fabric of human civilization. Ceres Station, the unofficial capital of the Belt and the beating heart of Belter identity. Tycho Station, the massive mobile construction platform where the future is literally built piece by piece. And Medina Station, the gateway to over 1,300 new worlds, standing sentinel in the alien space beyond the Ring Gate. These aren't abstract concepts or background details. These are places where people live, work, fight, and die, where families are raised in corridors carved from asteroids, where workers build generation ships with their own hands, where refugees pass through on their way to unknown frontiers. Each station tells a story about what it means to be human when Earth is no longer the center of everything, when home might be a spinning rock millions of kilometers from the sun, when your identity is shaped by where you were born and how much gravity your bones can handle. Tonight, we're going deep into these stations. We'll walk their corridors, understand their engineering, meet the people who call them home, and trace their evolution through the tumultuous events of the Expanse. We'll see how Ceres transformed from a UN protectorate into a symbol of Belter autonomy. We'll explore how Tycho became the secret headquarters of the OPA while ostensibly serving as a corporate shipyard. And we'll follow the remarkable journey of a Mormon generation ship that became a warship and finally a permanent way station in the most strategically important location in human-controlled space. So settle in, make yourself comfortable, and prepare for a journey through structures that dwarf anything humanity has ever built, yet remain vulnerable to the void that surrounds them. This is the reality of the Expanse, where stations matter because they represent humanity's fragile foothold in an unforgiving universe. Ceres Station, the beating heart of the belt. Picture a rock drifting through the asteroid belt, 955 kilometers in diameter. For billions of years, it tumbled through the void, just another chunk of ice and rock among countless others. Then humanity arrived, and everything changed. Ceres, officially designated 1 Ceres, is the largest object in the asteroid belt and the only dwarf planet in the inner solar system. It was the first asteroid ever discovered by humanity, spotted by Giuseppe Piazzi in 1801. But in the universe of the Expanse, set a few centuries in our future, Ceres has become something far more significant than an astronomical curiosity. It has become home to approximately 6 million permanent residents, with another million transiting through at any given time. It has become the most important port in the belt, where 800 to 1,000 ships dock every single day. It has become, in every way that matters, the unofficial capital of the Belters. But Ceres Station didn't just happen. Creating a livable environment from a spinning rock required engineering on a scale that staggers the imagination. When humanity first arrived at Ceres, it possessed a natural surface gravity of only 0.029 g. That's less than 3% of Earth's gravity, far too weak to allow for long-term habitation without severe health consequences. The human body, evolved over millions of years in Earth's gravity well, deteriorates rapidly in microgravity. Bones lose density, muscles atrophy, the cardiovascular system weakens. Long-term residents of such an environment would become physically unable to ever return to higher gravity worlds. Tycho Manufacturing and Engineering Concern, the legendary corporation that would shape so much of humanity's expansion into the outer planets, took on the monumental task of making Ceres habitable. Their solution was elegantly simple in concept, almost impossibly complex in execution. They would spin up the entire asteroid, using its rotation to create artificial gravity through centrifugal force. Imagine the scale of this undertaking. Ceres has a mass of approximately 940 quintillion kilograms. To spin something that massive requires adding enormous amounts of rotational energy. Engineers positioned massive Epstein drives tangentially to Ceres's equator, firing them in coordinated sequences over months or possibly years. Slowly, incrementally, they accelerated the dwarf planet's rotation until it achieved the desired spin rate. The result is a Ceres that rotates once every approximately 42 minutes, creating a centrifugal force at the equator of 0.3 g. That's 30% of Earth's gravity, slightly less than Mars, but sufficient to prevent the worst effects of long-term microgravity exposure. Belters born and raised on Ceres can walk, work, and live without the crippling bone loss that plagued earlier generations of space dwellers. But this engineering triumph came with peculiar consequences. On a spun-up asteroid, gravity works backwards from our intuition. Stand on the inner surface of Ceres's habitation tunnels, and down points outward toward the surface. Up points inward toward the asteroid's core. If you could drill through the rock to the outer surface and step outside, you'd be flung away into space by the centrifugal force that creates the artificial gravity inside. The station itself consists of tens of thousands of kilometers of tunnels, carved deep into Ceres' ice and rock. These aren't small mining shafts, but vast corridors, some wide enough to accommodate warehouses and factories, others branching into residential warrens where millions make their homes. The tunnels extend inward in layers, each level experiencing slightly different gravity. The outermost levels, closest to the surface, experience the full 0.3 g. Deeper levels, closer to the axis of rotation, experience progressively less centrifugal force. This variable gravity creates one of Ceres' most distinctive characteristics, the noticeable Coriolis effect in the lower levels. The Coriolis effect occurs on any rotating reference frame, causing moving objects to curve relative to the frame's rotation. On Earth, it's what makes hurricanes spin. On Ceres, in the lower gravity areas closer to the core, it's strong enough to affect daily life. Pour a drink, and the liquid curves in the air as it falls. Walk quickly, and you feel a sideways pull. First-time visitors from Earth or Mars often experience disorientation, nausea, and a sensation similar to seasickness, though they're millions of kilometers from the nearest ocean. The architecture of Ceres Station reflects both its engineering constraints and its social stratification. The outermost levels, where gravity is strongest and the Coriolis effect minimal, house the wealthy and privileged. These areas feature the closest thing to luxury the belt can offer. The famous Midtown District boasts wide corridors topped by a dome displaying an artificial sky, a digital approximation of the blue heavens most belters have never seen in person. The lighting here mimics sunlight, the architecture is clean and well-maintained, and the air is filtered and scented to mask the omnipresent industrial smells that permeate the rest of the station. But venture deeper, down into the rock, and the character of Ceres changes dramatically. The lower levels are darker, lit by harsh industrial lighting and the neon glow of countless small businesses. The corridors narrow, the ceilings press lower, and the smell of too many people living too close together becomes inescapable. Water rationing is severe enough that windows remain caked in grime, and residents measure their daily water allowance in drops rather than liters. The air tastes recycled, which it is, filtered through life. Support systems that have been patched and repaired countless times, but never quite work at full capacity. These lower levels are home to the majority of Ceres' population. Here, in tunnels that curve upward at the horizon due to the asteroid's curvature, belters build their lives from whatever they can scrape together. Restaurants operate from converted cargo trolleys, serving noodles and whatever protein the supply ships bring in. Bars occupy cramped spaces where workers crowd together after shifts, drinking cheap whiskey and sharing news from across the belt. Markets sell everything from legitimate goods to whatever falls off shipping containers, no questions asked. The docking facilities on Ceres represent an engineering marvel in their own right. 800 to 1,000 ships dock here every day, from massive ice haulers bringing water from Saturn's rings to tiny prospecting vessels hoping to strike it rich in the belt. The docking arms extend from the surface, rotating to match Ceres' spin. When a ship approaches, these arms reach out, grasping the vessel and synchronizing its rotation with the station before making hard seal. It's a delicate dance of orbital mechanics and precise timing, performed hundreds of times daily. The economic importance of Ceres cannot be overstated. As the belt's primary port, virtually everything moving through the outer planets passes through here at some point. Minerals mined from asteroids are processed and shipped to Earth and Mars. Water ice from the outer system is transferred to stations that lack their own supply. Food, manufactured goods, replacement parts, luxury items, everything flows through Ceres' docks. The station generates immense wealth, though precious little of it finds its way into the pockets of the belters who load and unload the cargo, maintain the docks, and keep the station running. For decades, Ceres operated as a UN protectorate, governed from Earth by officials who rarely bothered to visit and certainly didn't understand the realities of life in the belt. Security was handled by Star Helix, a private firm from Earth whose officers were mostly Earthers, with a handful of belters willing to work against their own people for a steady paycheck. The arrangement was profitable for Earth and Mars, who extracted resources from the belt while providing minimal investment in infrastructure or services. Water rationing remained severe despite Ceres' massive population. Life support systems ran on the edge of failure, and the belters who did the actual work of keeping the station functional saw little benefit from the wealth they helped generate. This exploitation bred resentment that eventually exploded into open conflict. The destruction of the Canterbury, an ice hauler carrying water to Ceres, became a flashpoint. Riots erupted in the lower levels as belters demanded answers and justice. The OPA, the Outer Planets Alliance, had long advocated for belter rights, but now they're more. Radical factions saw an opportunity. Through a combination of popular uprising and political maneuvering, control of Ceres gradually shifted from Earth to the OPA. This transition wasn't clean or peaceful. Star Helix officers found themselves besieged in their own station, unable to maintain order without triggering larger violence. UN officials abandoned Ceres, leaving it in OPA hands partly by choice, partly by necessity. The station that had symbolized Earth's control of the belt became almost overnight a symbol of belter resistance and autonomy. Life on Ceres, culture and survival. To understand Ceres Station, you need to understand what it means to live there. This isn't an abstract political entity or an economic zone on some administrator's star chart. This is home to 6 million people, each with their own hopes, fears, families, and daily struggles for survival in an environment that remains fundamentally hostile to human life. Water dominates every calculation on Ceres. Earth dwellers take it for granted, turning taps and watching clean water flow freely, using it to bathe, clean, water plants, sometimes even just let it run while thinking about something else. On Ceres, such wastefulness is literally unthinkable. Water is rationed with bureaucratic precision. Each resident receives a daily allowance measured in liters, tracked by computer systems that cut off flow when the limit is reached. Shower water is recycled, filtered, and used again. Drinking water comes from dispensers that measure every drop. Wastewater is processed through bioreclamation systems that extract every molecule that can be salvaged. The irony is bitter. Ceres itself contains vast quantities of water ice, locked in its core and subsurface layers, but extracting, purifying, and distributing that water requires energy and infrastructure. The mining operations that hollowed out Ceres long ago focused on mineral extraction, not water reclamation. Now, with millions of residents dependent on external supply, Ceres imports most of its water from ice haulers bringing frozen cargo from Saturn's rings or the outer belt. These shipments are expensive, controlled by corporations with their own agendas, and subject to interruption by political events far beyond any individual resident's control. When the Canterbury was destroyed, carrying its cargo of ice to Ceres, the station faced a genuine humanitarian crisis. Water reserves would last weeks, not months. Without resupply, Ceres Station would die, slowly, as residents dehydrated or life support systems failed. This vulnerability, this absolute dependence on external supply chains shapes every aspect of life on the station. The Coriolis effect, strongest in the lower levels where gravity weakens, adds another layer of strangeness to daily existence. Imagine pouring a drink in a bar deep in Ceres's tunnels. The liquid leaves the bottle in what appears to be a straight line, but then curves visibly as it falls, landing centimeters away from where intuition says it should. Walk quickly down a corridor, and you feel a sideways pull, as if the world is tilting beneath your feet. Run, and the effect becomes disorienting, a sensation of being pushed by invisible forces. New arrivals from Earth or Mars often suffer from what Belters call station sickness, a malady similar to seasickness, but caused by the disconnect between what their inner ears report and what their eyes see. They stumble, struggle with nausea, sometimes vomit despite medications. Belters, born and raised in these conditions, navigate the Coriolis-affected spaces instinctively. Their bodies adapted from childhood to the peculiarities of rotational physics. This physical adaptation goes deeper than just balance. Belters develop differently than Earthers or Martians. Growing up in 0.3 G, their bones are less dense, their frames taller and more elongated. Their cardiovascular systems run on lower pressure. Many Belters literally cannot visit Earth or Mars. The higher gravity would crush them, break bones, cause heart failure. They are, in a real sense, a different branch of humanity, adapted to an environment Earth dwellers can only visit temporarily. This physical difference reinforces cultural division. Belters refer to Earth and Mars inhabitants as inners, or more derisively as Inyaloda in their distinctive Creole language. The language itself, Lang Belta, reflects the belt's multicultural origins. When Tycho Manufacturing began recruiting workers for the asteroid mines, they drew from Earth's diverse population. Chinese, Slavic, Germanic, Romance languages. All these linguistic traditions merged in the confined spaces of ships and stations. The result is a Creole, a pidgin that became a full language, carrying lower prestige than Standard English, but rich with the belt's cultural identity. Listen to Belters speaking Lang Belta, and you hear the history of exploitation and survival. Words for water, air, and pressure are ubiquitous, reflecting the constant awareness of life support. Terms for family and crew are often interchangeable, because in the belt, your ship or station crew is your family in every way that matters. The language lacks words for many things Earthers take for granted: rain, oceans, open sky, because most Belters have never experienced these things, and never will. Social life on Ceres gravitates towards certain key locations. The docks are always active, a 24-hour bustle of cargo loading, ship maintenance, and the endless movement of goods and people. Belters congregate around the docking rings, waiting for work, looking for news from other stations, hoping to catch a berth on an outgoing ship. The competition is fierce. More workers than positions means someone is always desperate enough to take lower pay or worse conditions. Bars and restaurants serve as social hubs. Places like the Dock 12 Bar, a fixture in Ceres' docking district for years, become known quantities where people gather not just to drink, but to exchange information, make deals, and maintain the social networks that keep Belter society functioning. The Green Zone, one of Ceres' designated recreation areas, includes barbershops where workers get their hair cut while gossiping about station politics, noodle bars serving meals from converted cargo trolleys, and small businesses selling whatever people need or want. These spaces serve functions beyond their obvious purposes. In the absence of strong formal government or legal structures, informal networks matter more. Know the right bartender, and you can learn which ships are hiring. Know the right merchant in the gray market, and you can get parts that are officially unavailable. Know the right people, period, and you can navigate Ceres' complex social landscape without running afoul of the various factions, criminal organizations, and unofficial power structures that actually run the station. The OPA itself is less a unified organization than a collection of factions, each with their own leadership, priorities, and methods. Some OPA groups focus on legitimate political advocacy, pushing for Belter representation in solar system governance. Others engage in what Earth and Mars call terrorism, what they call resistance, striking at inter-planet interests through sabotage or violence. Still others are essentially criminal enterprises using OPA rhetoric to justify piracy or smuggling. This fragmentation means that living on Ceres requires navigating multiple, sometimes conflicting power structures. One OPA faction controls the docks. Another has influence over water distribution. A third runs protection rackets in the lower levels. Residents learn which symbols to display, which slogans to voice, which groups to curry favor with. The alternative is finding yourself without work, without water, without a place in the social order that determines who survives and who doesn't. Detective Miller, one of the key characters in the Expanse's early storylines, embodies many of these contradictions. Born and raised on Ceres, he works for Star Helix Security, making him a Belter employed by an Earth company to police other Belters. His colleagues are mostly Earthers who don't understand the station or its people. He walks the line between cultures, belonging fully to neither, respected by few. Through Miller's eyes, we see Ceres' darker underbelly, the organized crime that thrives in the lower levels, running gambling, prostitution, and the ubiquitous gray market. The domestic violence that goes unreported because Star Helix officers rarely venture into the deep tunnels. The desperation that drives people to take desperate chances. Whether that's signing on to a dangerous mining operation or getting involved in criminal schemes. Miller is a good cop in a bad system, trying to do right while surrounded by institutional failure. When riots erupt after the Canterbury's destruction, Miller finds himself caught between his duty to Star Helix and his sympathy for the rioters. These aren't criminals or terrorists. These are scared people facing the prospect of dying from thirst because someone destroyed an ice hauler. The riots are ugly, violent, and absolutely rational given the circumstances. Miller's response to this crisis, his choices about who to protect and who to pursue, reflects the impossible position many Belters find themselves in, caught between survival and principles, between their identity and their circumstances. Tycho Station, the mobile shipyard. If Ceres represents the lived reality of the belt, Tycho Station represents its industrial might and technological ambition. Where Ceres was carved from a dwarf planet, Tycho is entirely artificial. A massive construction platform built in space, for space, with capabilities unmatched anywhere in the solar system. Tycho Station is a ring station approximately 700 meters in diameter, built around a manufacturing sphere half a kilometer across. Inside that sphere, 65 million cubic meters of manufacturing and storage space allow for the construction of structures larger than any shipyard at Luna can accommodate. 2 counter-rotating habitat rings encircle the manufacturing sphere, providing living space for 15,000 workers and their families, all maintained in the standard microgravity environment that Belters prefer. The design is elegant in its efficiency. The habitat rings counter-rotate to cancel out each other's angular momentum, keeping the station stable without needing constant thrust corrections. Each compartment within the rings is built on a swivel system that allows the chambers to reorient when the station needs to move. When Tycho travels, the rings stop spinning. The compartments rotate to face the direction of thrust, and residents experience thrust gravity instead of rotational artificial gravity. It's a flexibility that Earth-based or asteroid-based facilities simply cannot match. But Tycho's real glory is visible on the manufacturing sphere's surface. 6 massive construction waldos, robotic arms capable of moving and positioning components weighing thousands of tons. extend from the sphere like the arms of some mechanical deity. These Waldos can grasp and manipulate entire ship sections, positioning them with millimeter precision. They can grip a heavy freighter and hold it steady, while work crews swarm over its hull. They can lift structural elements that would crush any crane on Earth or Mars. Underneath the manufacturing sphere, a bulbous projection 50 meters across houses Tycho's power plant and drive system. This is a capital ship-class fusion reactor, capable of generating power on a scale that would supply a small city. The drive system is equally impressive. Multiple Epstein drives that can move the entire massive station. Tycho isn't just a construction platform. It's a mobile construction platform capable of relocating itself anywhere in the belt where its capabilities are needed. This mobility is both practical and strategic. Practically, it allows Tycho to position itself near raw material sources, reducing transportation costs for whatever project is underway. Strategically, it means Tycho can't be easily targeted or controlled. Earth or Mars could potentially blockade an asteroid-based shipyard, strangling it through denial of supplies. Tycho can simply move, burning to a different location where different political calculations apply. The station's history traces back to the legendary Malthus Tycho, engineering genius and founder of Tycho Manufacturing and Engineering Concern. The company pioneered much of the belt's early development. They captured a comet and parked it in stable orbit as a water resupply point, decades before companies like Pure and Clean began systematic ice harvesting from Saturn's rings. They engineered the decade-long project to spin up Ceres, giving it the artificial gravity that made large-scale habitation possible. They were slated to build floating cities in Venus's upper atmosphere, a project that was eventually canceled but demonstrated the scope of their ambitions. Tycho Station itself has existed for over a century, upgrading and expanding as technology advanced and projects demanded greater capabilities. By the time of the Expanse's main storyline, it represents the pinnacle of belt engineering, the only shipyard in the solar system capable of building vessels larger than the Bush shipyards at Luna. The Nauvoo project exemplifies Tycho's capabilities. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, commissioned a generation ship that would carry thousands of faithful on a century-long voyage to Tau Ceti. The specifications were staggering: 2 kilometers long, half a kilometer wide, with internal volume sufficient to house 4 Doniger-class battleships without touching the walls. 8 Epstein drives, each the size of a frigate's main engine, would propel it. The rotating internal drum would provide artificial gravity for multiple generations of passengers who would be born, live, and die during the journey. Building such a vessel required capabilities that simply didn't exist anywhere else. Luna's shipyards, impressive by Earth standards, couldn't accommodate a hull this large. Mars's shipyards focused on military vessels and lacked the civilian construction infrastructure. Only Tycho had both the physical space and the engineering expertise to undertake the Nauvoo's construction. The project employed thousands of workers over several years. Watching it take shape, observers could see the Waldos positioning massive structural members. Work crews in vacuum suits swarming over the hull like insects on some vast mechanical carcass, material handlers shoveling components from storage to assembly points in a carefully choreographed dance. The sheer scale dwarfed anything most people had ever seen constructed. But Tycho Station harbored secrets beyond its obvious industrial capacity. Frederick Lucius Johnson, better known as Fred Johnson, served as the station's chief of operations. On the surface, he managed Tycho Manufacturing's operations, oversaw construction projects, maintained relationships with Earth and Mars politicians who funded much of Tycho's work. Below the surface, Fred Johnson had become the de facto leader of the Outer Planets Alliance's moderate faction, and Tycho Station secretly served as the OPA's headquarters. The OPA's presence at Tycho was an open secret that everyone pretended not to acknowledge. Earth and Mars knew or suspected that OPA operations ran through Tycho, but moving against the station would be difficult and potentially disastrous. Tycho made regular campaign contributions to politicians on both Earth and Mars, ensuring that any attack would face political resistance. The station's mobility meant it could flee if threatened, and destroying humanity's premier shipyard would harm everyone's interests, including Earth and Mars, who occasionally commissioned vessels from Tycho. Fred Johnson himself embodied contradictions that made him simultaneously valuable and controversial. Born on Earth, he served with distinction in the United Nations Marine Corps, earning decorations and recognition for his skill and courage. His most infamous mission, the assault on Anderson Station to retake it from OPA insurgents, earned him the Medal of Freedom, the UNMC's highest honor. It also earned him the nickname the Butcher of Anderson Station among Belters, after reports emerged that over 1,000 civilians died in the assault. The burden of that action broke something in Johnson. He resigned from the Marines, publicly apologized for his role in the Anderson Station massacre, and spent years drinking in belt bars, getting into fights with OPA members, until Anderson Dawes recruited him. Dawes saw potential in Johnson's guilt and military expertise. The OPA needed someone who understood inner-planet military thinking, who could negotiate with Earth and Mars officials, who had the strategic vision to build something more than a fragmented resistance movement. Under Johnson's leadership, Tycho Station became the OPA's most significant asset. The station's manufacturing capabilities allowed for the construction of OPA Navy vessels, gunships that gave Belters something approaching military parity with inner-planet forces. The station's communication arrays could tight-beam messages across the solar system, coordinating OPA activities that would otherwise require weeks for instructions to reach their destinations. The station's laboratories and engineering facilities provided infrastructure for research projects, including the controversial work with protomolecule samples that would have such profound consequences. Johnson ran Tycho with a careful balance of public and covert operations. Publicly, the station built civilian vessels and commercial installations, maintaining the fiction of being simply a corporate shipyard. Covertly, it served as command center for OPA military and political operations. The 15,000 residents included not just construction workers and their families, but OPA soldiers, intelligence analysts, political organizers, and refugees from other stations where OPA sympathies had made them targets. This dual nature made Tycho a target. As tensions escalated between Earth, Mars, and the Belt, various factions plotted to either capture or neutralize Tycho's capabilities. The protomolecule sample Johnson kept secure in his private quarters became a particular focus of attention. Multiple groups, including radical OPA factions that rejected Johnson's moderate approach, wanted that sample for their own purposes. The station's defenses reflected its importance and vulnerability. Point defense cannons studded the habitat rings, capable of shooting down incoming missiles. Electronic warfare suites could jam enemy targeting systems. The station maintained a small fleet of gunships that could respond to threats. Most importantly, Tycho's engines allowed for rapid escape if a larger force approached. The station could start burning, building velocity, making any pursuit costly and time-consuming. But internal security proved more challenging than external defense. When radical OPA factions decided to seize the proto-molecule sample, they didn't need to attack from outside. They suborned Tycho's own chief engineer, Sakai, along with several other staff members. The resulting coup attempt penetrated directly to Johnson's private quarters, bypassing external defenses entirely. The attack succeeded in stealing the proto-molecule sample, though it cost the conspirators heavily and left Fred Johnson mortally wounded. Johnson's death marked the end of an era for Tycho Station and the OPA. His unique position, neither fully belter nor inner, neither purely military nor purely political, had allowed him to bridge divides that others couldn't. His replacement, Kamina Drummer, brought different strengths and different priorities. The station continued operating, but its role in belt politics evolved as the Free Navy conflict reshaped power structures throughout the solar system. Tycho's role in the conflict. The theft of the proto-molecule sample from Tycho Station represented more than just a security failure. It symbolized the fracturing of the OPA into competing factions with irreconcilable visions for the belt's future. Fred Johnson had advocated for legitimacy, for negotiating with Earth and Mars from a position of strength but within existing frameworks. Marco Inaros and the Free Navy rejected this approach entirely, seeing it as capitulation to the inner planet's authority. The attack on Tycho came during a period of maximum vulnerability. Earth had just suffered devastating asteroid impacts orchestrated by Inaros, killing billions and throwing the planet into chaos. Mars faced its own internal divisions as rogue elements of the MCRN defected to Inaros, providing him with advanced military technology. The OPA itself splintered, with some factions supporting Inaros's radical approach, while others remained loyal to Johnson's moderate vision. The assault began with deception. A belter ship, the Zemaia, approached Tycho claiming mechanical difficulties. This wasn't unusual. Ships frequently put into Tycho for repairs or supplies. The station's protocols involved security checks, but these could be circumvented by someone with inside knowledge, which Sakai and his co-conspirators possessed. The Zemaia's true purpose became clear when it fired on a shipping container that was supposed to provide cover for Johnson and James Holden during the sample transfer. The torpedo strike destroyed the container and launched a specialized breaching pod at the habitat ring, targeting Johnson's private quarters with precision that suggested detailed interior knowledge. Inside the station, Sakai and other compromised staff members betrayed their colleagues. They killed security personnel who remained loyal to Johnson, secured auxiliary engineering, and attempted to sabotage the station's reactor in a way that would have destroyed Tycho entirely. The plan was sophisticated, coordinated across multiple points of failure, designed to either successfully steal the protomolecule or ensure no one else could possess it. Johnson and Holden, along with Kamina Drummer and loyal security forces, fought back against the coup attempt. The battle for auxiliary engineering became particularly vicious, fought in confined spaces where every stray shot risked breaching hull integrity. Johnson activated ambush teams he'd prepared for exactly this contingency, demonstrating the paranoia that had kept him alive through years of belt politics. They retook critical systems, prevented the reactor sabotage, and captured or killed most of the conspirators. But they couldn't prevent the theft. The specialized mech robot the Zemaya deployed penetrated Johnson's quarters, located the protomolecule sample hidden beneath his bed, and extracted with it before defenders could respond. Johnson took fatal wounds during the fighting, shot in the back by Sakai during the chaos of close-quarters combat. The success of this operation demonstrated Inaros's strategic thinking. He understood that controlling the protomolecule meant controlling humanity's future in ways that conventional military power could never achieve. The protomolecule, that alien technology recovered from Aero Station years earlier, represented capabilities beyond human engineering. It could restructure matter at the molecular level, create structures of impossible complexity, and possibly serve as a weapon more devastating than any nuclear arsenal. Johnson's assassination sent shockwaves through the belt. For years, he'd been the face of the moderate OPA, the leader, who argued that Belters could achieve recognition and rights through negotiation rather than violence. His death left a vacuum in Belt leadership that various factions rushed to fill. Kamina Drummer, Johnson's protege and the station's second-in-command, assumed leadership of Tycho's operations. But her authority was immediately challenged by other OPA factions who'd never fully accepted Johnson's moderate approach. The period following Johnson's death saw Tycho Station become a target for competing interests. Marco Inaros, emboldened by his successful theft and the devastation he'd inflicted on Earth, saw Tycho's manufacturing capabilities as essential to building the Free Navy into a true military force. He wanted the station intact, operational, and under his control. Earth's surviving government, reeling from the asteroid impacts but not yet defeated, saw Tycho as a potential asset that couldn't be allowed to fall into Inaros's hands. Mars, caught between its treaty obligations to Earth and its own internal divisions, viewed Tycho with suspicion and opportunity in equal measure. Drummer navigated this impossible situation with a combination of diplomacy and defiance. She refused to submit Tycho to Free Navy control, recognizing that doing so would make the station complicit in Inaros's genocide against Earth. But she also couldn't openly oppose Inaros without inviting an assault that Tycho couldn't survive. The station's defenses were formidable against opportunistic raiders or small military forces, but they couldn't withstand a determined attack by a fleet equipped with stolen Martian technology. The strategic situation forced Drummer into alliance with the Inner Planets, a choice that would have been unthinkable to the OPA just years earlier. She worked with Holden and the crew of the Rocinante to coordinate operations against the Free Navy, using Tycho's intelligence capabilities and manufacturing facilities to support the Allied forces. This collaboration included sharing information about Free Navy movements, using Tycho's communication arrays to coordinate scattered resistance groups, and even constructing vessels for the combined fleet. But Tycho's position remained precarious. The station couldn't permanently defend against the Free Navy while also maintaining its industrial operations. Workers couldn't focus on ship construction when combat could erupt at any moment. The population, already stressed by rationing and security measures, faced increasing uncertainty about their future. Some residents left, catching berths on outbound ships to stations that seemed safer. Others stayed, out of loyalty to Drummer, or simply because they had nowhere else to go. The Free Navy eventually launched a major assault on Tycho Station, recognizing that leaving it in enemy hands undermined their control of the belt. The attack came from multiple vectors, designed to overwhelm the station's point defense and prevent escape. Free Navy gunships, equipped with stolen MCRN railguns and torpedo systems, engaged Tycho's defenders while marine assault ships moved to breach the habitat rings. The battle for Tycho was fierce but relatively brief. Drummer recognized that defending the station to destruction would accomplish nothing. She'd already evacuated non-essential personnel and relocated critical intelligence files. When Free Navy forces breached the outer defenses and began boarding actions, she ordered a general evacuation. Tycho's residents fled in every available ship, scattering across the belt to avoid pursuit. Drummer herself barely escaped, transferring to the Rocinante as Free Navy Marines swept through the habitat rings. The Free Navy's victory was Pyrrhic. They captured Tycho Station intact, but found it stripped of most valuable assets. The manufacturing facilities remained, but key personnel had fled. The communication arrays still functioned, but intelligence networks had been disrupted. The station itself became a prize that required garrison forces to hold, diverting resources from offensive operations elsewhere. Moreover, Tycho's capture rallied opposition to the Free Navy. Moderate belters who'd been ambivalent about the conflict saw the assault as proof that Inaros didn't represent belt interests, but only his own ambition. Stations that had stayed neutral began quietly supporting the Allied effort to retake the belt from Free Navy control. The propaganda value of martyring Johnson and capturing Tycho actually undermined Inaros's position more than it strengthened it. When Allied forces eventually retook Tycho, they found it damaged but salvageable. The Free Navy garrison had attempted to sabotage key systems during their retreat, but hadn't succeeded in destroying the station's core capabilities. Repair efforts began immediately, though they were complicated by shortages of materials and personnel. The war had scattered Tycho's workforce across dozens of stations and ships, and convincing them to return required guarantees about security and stability that were difficult to provide in wartime. In the war's aftermath, Tycho Station faced an identity crisis. Its role as covert OPA headquarters had ended with Johnson's death, and the OPA's fragmentation. Its function as premier shipyard remained, but the market for civilian vessels had collapsed during the war. The station needed new purpose, new investment, and new leadership to rebuild what had been lost. The solution came through the Transport Union, the organization that eventually assumed control of traffic through the ring gates. Tycho relocated to Pallas, another large asteroid in the belt, where it could serve as a construction facility for the Union's expanding fleet. The move was logistically complex, requiring the station to burn for weeks and carefully maneuver into orbit around its new home. But it represented a fresh start, a way to preserve Tycho's capabilities while moving beyond the station's complicated political history. Under Transport Union administration, Tycho focused on building the specialized vessels needed for interstellar commerce. Void cities, massive habitat ships that would serve as mobile way stations in slower-than-light transit between ring gates, long-range haulers designed to carry cargo through the gate network, explorer vessels for surveying newly accessible star systems. The work was similar to what Tycho had always done, but the context was entirely different. Instead of serving competing factions in humanity's internal conflicts, Tycho now built infrastructure for humanity's expansion into the galaxy. The station's workers adapted to this new role with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Some saw it as betrayal of Tycho's identity as a belt institution, now serving an organization controlled by inners and betrayers alike. Others recognized practical reality. The war had devastated the belt's economy. Working for the Transport Union meant steady employment, reliable supplies, and relative security. Ideological purity doesn't put food on the table or air in the lungs. The ring gate and slow zone. To understand Medina Station's significance, we first need to understand the ring and the space beyond it. The ring gate appeared suddenly in the space beyond Uranus, a massive structure constructed by the proto-molecule using the biomass from Eros Station. It was a perfect torus, 1,000 kilometers in diameter, made of material that analysis couldn't identify. It didn't emit radiation, didn't react to impacts, and couldn't be damaged by any weapon humanity possessed. The proto-molecule, that alien technology discovered on Phoebe and studied by Protogen Corporation with catastrophic results, had its own agenda. After consuming Eros Station and its 100,000 inhabitants, it had piloted the entire asteroid toward Venus. There, it had built something in the planet's crushing atmosphere and superheated environment. Then, it launched that something toward the outer system, where it constructed the ring. The ring's purpose remained mysterious until the Rocinante, on contract to the UN, approached it with news crews in tow. When the ship crossed the ring's threshold, it didn't emerge on the other side. Instead, it entered a pocket dimension that would come to be called the slow zone. This space existed outside normal reality, a bubble approximately 1,000,000 kilometers across, lit by a false sun that wasn't actually a sun at all. The slow zone's most distinctive feature was its speed limit. Objects entering this space could travel no faster than approximately 600 meters per second, less than 1% of the velocity most ships routinely achieved. More precisely, objects couldn't accelerate past this threshold.
The protomolecule's systems detected excessive velocity and neutralized it through a process that seemed to violate known physics. Kinetic energy simply disappeared, converted into something else, or dumped into some
dimension humanity couldn't perceive. This speed limit applied universally. A bullet fired from a gun would travel normally until hitting the threshold, then decelerate instantly to the maximum permitted velocity. A ship trying to burn faster would find its Epstein drive mysteriously losing effectiveness. Even electromagnetic radiation seemed affected, though in subtle ways that made communication difficult across the slow zone's vast distances. Ships that violated the speed limit triggered a defensive response from the ring station, the massive alien structure at the slow zone's center. Energy pulses would lash out, draining power from the offending vessel. Initially, these pulses seemed proportional to the violation. A small excess in velocity triggered a small response, but the system was cumulative. Each violation increased the sensitivity, lowering the threshold for response and increasing the severity of the energy drain. The Behemoth, the OPA warship converted from the Nauvoo, learned this the hard way during the crisis that accompanied the ring's opening. Multiple ships entering the slow zone, combined with combat operations inside, triggered increasingly severe responses from the ring station. Ships lost power completely, leaving crews dying in darkness as life support failed. The false sun at the slow zone center began pulsing, each pulse draining more energy from every human-made system in the pocket dimension. Humanity faced extinction in that moment, not from hostile aliens, but from an automated defense system responding to what it perceived as attack. The protomolecule technology, billions of years old and designed for purposes humans couldn't comprehend, simply reacted according to its programming. The pulses would continue, each one more powerful, until either the perceived threat ended or every energy source in the slow zone was neutralized. The resolution came through James Holden's connection to Detective Miller, or rather to the ghost of Miller that the protomolecule had created. Miller, consumed by the protomolecule on Eros, had somehow retained enough consciousness to interact with the alien systems. Through him, Holden communicated humanity's lack of hostile intent, convincing the ring station to stop its defensive response. More importantly, Miller's interaction with the station revealed the ring's true purpose. It wasn't just a gate to one destination. It was a gate to 1,373 destinations, each ring leading to a different star system. The slow zone served as a hub, a central nexus from which travelers could access any of the other gates. The alien civilization that built this network, the civilization the protomolecule came from, had constructed it over 1 million years ago to connect worlds across the galaxy. That civilization was long dead, destroyed by something even more alien and incomprehensible, but their technology remained functional, waiting for someone to use it. Humanity, stumbling into this inheritance, suddenly had access to over 1,000 potentially habitable worlds. the implications were staggering, overwhelming, impossible to fully process. But first, humanity needed to address immediate, practical questions. Who would control access to the gates? How would traffic be managed through the slow zone? What rules would govern colonization of newly accessible worlds? These questions became sources of immediate conflict as Earth, Mars, and the Belt all claimed authority over the gates based on different reasoning. Earth argued that as humanity's homeworld and largest population center, it had natural authority over the gates. The UN had governed humanity's expansion through the solar system. It should govern expansion beyond. Mars countered that as the most advanced military power and most successful colonization project, it deserved authority over the gate network. The Martians had spent generations building their world. They understood what interstellar colonization would require. The Belt rejected both arguments, claiming that the proto-molecule had constructed the gates using material from Eros, a belt station, making the gates inherently belt property. The political deadlock was resolved not through negotiation, but through fait accompli. The OPA, specifically the faction that controlled the behemoth, simply claimed the ring station as belt territory. They converted their warship into a permanent habitat, renamed it Medina Station, and established control over traffic through the slow zone. Earth and Mars lacked the military capability to dislodge them, especially after the devastating Free Navy conflict, and challenging OPA control risked triggering another war that nobody could afford. This pragmatic solution created the framework for humanity's expansion into the gate network. Medina Station became the gatekeeper, literally and figuratively. Every ship traveling between star systems had to pass through the slow zone, and by extension, past Medina. The station collected fees, enforced regulations, and maintained the infrastructure necessary for safe transit through what remained dangerous and poorly understood space. Medina Station, from warship to way station. The story of Medina Station begins decades before its conversion, when the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints commissioned construction of a generation ship. The Mormon Church had long looked toward the stars with millennial anticipation. Colonizing new worlds fit naturally into their theological framework, which included concepts of eternal progression and the transformation of worlds. When the Epstein Drive made interstellar travel theoretically possible, if extraordinarily lengthy, church leadership began planning in earnest. The Nauvoo, named after the Illinois city where early Mormons established their largest pre-Utah settlement, was designed to carry thousands of faithful believers on a century-long journey to Tau Ceti, a star system 12 light-years from Earth. The specifications were magnificent in their ambition. The ship would measure 2 kilometers long and half a kilometer wide, large enough that 4 Doniger-class battleships could fit inside its main drum without touching the walls. The internal drum would rotate to provide artificial gravity for passengers. Inside, architects designed an environment that could sustain multiple generations. Agricultural sections to grow food, water recycling systems robust enough to maintain supply for 100 years. living quarters for families who would spend entire lifetimes aboard, educational facilities to train children born in transit. Everything needed for a self-sufficient, mobile society. 8 massive Epstein drives, each the size of a frigate's main engine, would propel the Nauvoo toward its destination. The acceleration would be gentle, preserving the artificial gravity environment inside and avoiding stresses that might compromise hull integrity over decades of thrust. Even so, the ship would eventually reach substantial fractions of light speed, cutting the transit time to Tau Ceti to a century rather than the millennia slower vessels would require. The Mormon Church invested enormous resources in this project. Financial contributions from members worldwide, accumulated over decades, funded construction. Church leadership recruited volunteers willing to leave the solar system forever, selecting families based on skills, health, and religious commitment. The plan called for departure to coincide with specific prophetic timelines, making the Nauvoo not just a colony ship, but a fulfillment of religious destiny. Tycho Station built the Nauvoo over several years, with construction visible to anyone in the belt. The massive hull took shape in Tycho's manufacturing sphere, too large to move until the drives were installed and tested. Mormon observers watched the construction with pride and anticipation, seeing their dreams literally taking physical form. Then the Eros incident changed everything. When the proto-molecule consumed Eros Station and began piloting it toward Earth, humanity faced extinction. The asteroid-turned biomass incubator possessed enough momentum that impacting Earth would cause extinction-level devastation. Every weapon thrown at Eros either missed or was absorbed by the protomolecule's defenses. Conventional military responses failed comprehensively. Fred Johnson, in consultation with Jim Holden and the Rocinante crew, identified one possible solution. The Nauvoo, still under construction but with functional drives, could be launched on a collision course with Eros. The generation ship's mass and velocity might be sufficient to knock the infected asteroid off its trajectory, pushing it away from Earth even if the impact destroyed the Nauvoo itself. The plan was desperate, expensive, and represented the destruction of decades of Mormon dreams and investment, but it offered Earth's only real chance of survival. Johnson made the call without requesting permission from the Mormon Church, knowing they'd refuse. He ordered Tycho's crews to complete enough of the Nauvoo's systems to make it mobile, loaded it with the maximum fusion fuel the tanks could hold, and programmed a burn that would intersect Eros's trajectory. The Nauvoo launched on what should have been a suicide run. The massive ship accelerated toward Eros, building velocity, preparing for impact. Then, at the last moment before collision, the proto-molecule demonstrated capabilities nobody had anticipated. Eros changed course, dodging the Nauvoo with precision that shouldn't have been possible for something without conventional drives. The generation ship missed its target completely, continuing past on a trajectory that carried it out of the inner system. The Mormon Church's reaction was complicated. They'd lost their generation ship without even being consulted, sacrificed on a mission that failed anyway. The decades of investment, the carefully laid plans, the theological significance of the project, all rendered meaningless by Fred Johnson's unilateral decision. Some church members understood the necessity and forgave the loss. Others saw it as theft, as Earth and the Belt once again taking from the faithful without permission or recompense.
the Nauvoo drifted for a time, its course carrying it out toward the belt and beyond. Various factions discussed salvaging it, but the ship's size and momentum made recovery efforts expensive and complicated. It became a piece of space debris, valuable but functionally abandoned, until the OPA faction led by Clace Ashford and Kamina Drummer claimed it. They saw potential in the massive hull. Reconfigured, the Nauvoo could become a warship unlike anything the Belt had ever possessed. The OPA Navy consisted mostly of repurposed civilian vessels and small gunships built at Tycho. A capital ship, something that could challenge Earth or Mars vessels on equal terms, would transform the OPA's military position. The project became a political statement as much as a practical military acquisition. The Belt would prove it could build power projection capabilities matching the Inners. The conversion process was extensive. Engineers stripped out much of the interior designed for long-term habitation, replacing it with weapons systems, armor plating, and military infrastructure. The drum section became a massive railgun, using the generation ship's entire length as an acceleration channel. Point defense cannons studded the hung. Torpedo tubes were installed at strategic positions. Crew quarters replaced passenger accommodations designed for military personnel rather than families. They renamed it the Behemoth, a name reflecting its size and the OPA's ambitions. The Behemoth represented Belt pride, a symbol that the OPA could achieve technological and military parity with Earth and Mars. When it launched, leading an OPA fleet through the ring gate into the slow
zone, it carried not just military hardware, but generations of Belter resentment and aspiration. The crisis in the slow zone, however, revealed that military might couldn't solve every problem. When the ring station's defensive systems began draining power from every ship in the space, the Behemoth's weapons were useless. Its massive railgun couldn't shoot what couldn't be targeted. Its armor couldn't protect against energy pulses that bypassed physical barriers. The ship that was supposed to demonstrate belt power instead became a liability, a huge target consuming disproportionate resources while contributing little to solving the actual crisis. But the Behemoth's size became an asset in unexpected ways. When Kamina Drummer and her engineering team needed to generate massive electrical signals to communicate with the ring station, the Behemoth's reactor and electrical systems provided sufficient capacity. The ship's interior volume allowed for the construction of transmission arrays that smaller vessels couldn't accommodate. Its structural strength held together under stresses that would have torn apart lighter vessels. After the crisis resolved and humanity gained access to the entire gate network, the Behemoth's purpose evolved again. Converting a warship into a station was, in many ways, simpler than the original conversion from generation ship to warship. Much of the interior space designed for long-term habitation could be restored. The drum section, instead of serving as a railgun, could rotate to provide artificial gravity for permanent residence. Docking facilities could be added to the exterior, allowing multiple ships to berth simultaneously. The renamed Medina station took up position in the slow zone, approximately at the hub point where ships entering from any gate could most easily reach any other gate. This central location was strategic, practical, and symbolic. Whoever controlled Medina controlled access to all 1,373 star systems. Ships couldn't easily bypass the station, as the slow zone speed limit made long detours prohibitively expensive in time. Any vessel wanting to travel from one system to another had to pass within easy detection range of Medina. The station's permanent population grew gradually as the OPA recruited personnel to staff it. Running a way station in alien space required diverse skills. Traffic control operators to manage the constant flow of ships through the slow zone. Maintenance crews to repair vessels damaged in transit. Security forces to enforce regulations and respond to emergencies. Medical personnel to treat injuries and illnesses. Merchants to provide supplies, equipment, and services to transiting ships. Eventually, families joined the workforce, creating a permanent community rather than just a military garrison. Life aboard Medina retained echoes of both its origins. The drum section, originally designed to house Mormon families traveling to Tau Ceti, now housed Belters, Earthers, and Martians, working together to manage interstellar traffic. The interior spaces that Mormon architects had envisioned as schools and homes became offices, storage facilities, and commercial districts. The agricultural sections remained, though modified to feed a different population than originally planned. The station's culture reflected this mixed heritage. Belter Creole dominated conversation, but Standard English and Mandarin were also common. Food served in the station's restaurants came from hydroponics bays that Mormon planners had designed, but belt workers now maintained. Regulations posted throughout the station were written by OPA bureaucrats, but enforced by a security force that included former MCRN Marines and Earth Cops, alongside Belters who'd never seen a planet. Medina's strategic importance made it a target during the Free Navy conflict. Marco Inaros recognized that controlling the Gate network would give his faction leverage over all of humanity. Earth and Mars could potentially recover from the asteroid strikes he'd already inflicted, but if he controlled access to the 1,300 new worlds, he controlled humanity's future. Medina in the Free Navy conflict. The Free Navy's assault on Medina Station was methodical and devastating. Unlike the chaotic attack on Tycho, this was a carefully planned military operation designed to capture the station intact with minimal damage to its essential systems. Inaros couldn't afford to destroy Medina. He needed it functional to serve as his base for controlling gate traffic. The assault began with infiltration rather than direct attack. Free Navy sympathizers working aboard Medina, recruited months earlier through a combination of ideological appeal and bribery, sabotaged key defensive systems. Point defense cannons failed when needed most. Targeting systems glitched. Communication arrays went offline at critical moments. The station's defenders found themselves fighting blind and deaf, unable to coordinate responses or call for help. External forces struck simultaneously. A Free Navy fleet, equipped with stolen MCRN vessels, emerged from multiple ring gates, surrounding Medina and cutting off escape routes. They didn't immediately open fire. Instead, they broadcast ultimatums demanding surrender, promising fair treatment for those who yielded and threatening total destruction for resistance. The station's command structure fractured under pressure. Some officers advocated fighting to the last, refusing to surrender humanity's gateway to the stars. Others recognized the futility of resistance against superior forces and internal sabotage. The debate consumed precious time, while Free Navy forces maneuvered into better attack positions. The actual battle, when it came, was brief. Free Navy Marines launched boarding actions at multiple points, breaching the hull and flooding into the station's corridors. They moved with the precision of forces that had trained extensively for this specific operation, demonstrating detailed knowledge of Medina's layout. Within hours, they controlled the drum section, the docking facilities, and the station's command center. Resistance continued in isolated pockets. Security forces and armed civilians fought running battles through maintenance tunnels and cargo holds, inflicting casualties but unable to prevent the station's fall. Eventually, facing overwhelming numbers and cut off from leadership, most defenders surrendered or fled in whatever ships they could reach. Marco Inaros arrived at Medina in triumph, claiming the station for the Free Navy and, by extension, for the Belt. His propaganda broadcasts celebrated this victory as the culmination of Belter resistance against inter-planet oppression. The gates belonged to Belters, he declared, built from Belt material using Belt labor. Earth and Mars had no legitimate claim. From now on, access to the 1,300 new worlds would be granted or denied by the Free Navy according to Belt interests. The reality was more complicated than Inaros's rhetoric suggested. Controlling Medina didn't mean controlling all gate traffic. Ships could still enter the slow zone from any of the 1,373 gates. What Medina controlled was the infrastructure that made transit safe and efficient. Navigation data, traffic control, emergency services, supplies, and repairs. These were services that transiting ships needed, and Medina was positioned to provide them. Inaros established military control through a combination of force and incentive structures. Free Navy gunships patrolled the slow zone, inspecting ships and enforcing regulations that favored Belt interests. Interplanet vessels faced higher fees, longer inspection delays, and occasional confiscation of cargo deemed strategic. Belt ships enjoyed preferential treatment, expedited transit, and protection from harassment by rival factions. The station itself was transformed into a military installation.
Additional weapons systems were installed, including railguns positioned to cover the approaches from the major gates. The drum section, which had provided artificial gravity for permanent residents, was partially converted into a fortress, with fortified positions that could defend against boarding actions. The population was purged of those deemed unreliable, with suspected Earth or Mars sympathizers expelled or imprisoned. This militarization came at the cost of Medina's function as a civilian way station. Merchant traffic declined as traders grew wary of free Navy inspections and unpredictable regulations. Colonial expeditions to newly accessible worlds slowed as prospective colonists hesitated to commit to ventures that required passing through hostile territory. The economic activity that had been growing around Medina dried up, leaving the station dependent on Free Navy logistical support. The strategic situation was inherently unstable. Inaros's control of Medina depended on his fleet's ability to defend it, but that fleet was engaged in combat operations throughout the solar system. Every ship committed to Medina's defense was a ship unavailable for offensive operations elsewhere. As Earth and Mars recovered from the initial asteroid strikes and organized counterattacks, maintaining adequate forces at the station became increasingly difficult. The ring station itself posed additional complications. The alien technology that maintained the slow zone and connected the gates didn't respond to human authority claims. It simply existed, operating according to its own logic, occasionally demonstrating capabilities that reminded humanity how little it understood. Ships entering the slow zone still triggered defensive responses if they violated the speed limit. The false sun at the center still pulsed in ways that made sensor readings unreliable. The ring station's systems occasionally did things nobody could predict or explain. Free Navy scientists and engineers studied the ring station intensively, hoping to understand or possibly control it. They achieved marginal success, learning to predict some responses and avoid triggering the most severe defensive reactions. But fundamental control remained elusive. The station was billions of years old, built by a civilization that had achieved capabilities humanity couldn't reproduce. Expecting to master it in months or years was optimistic to the point of delusion. Allied forces, the combined Earth, Mars, and non-Free Navy belt factions, eventually mounted operations to retake Medina. The assault was complicated by the station's position and the slow zone's unique physics. The speed limit meant that approaching forces couldn't use the velocity-based tactics that defined most space combat. Ships moved slowly, giving defenders time to prepare. Missiles accelerated sluggishly, making them easy targets for point defense. Railgun shots lost their devastating kinetic energy, becoming merely dangerous rather than instantly fatal. The battle for Medina became an exercise in boarding actions and close combat. Marines from multiple factions fought through the station's corridors, paying in blood for every section captured. The Free Navy garrison defended with desperation, born of knowing that defeat meant trial for war crimes. Sections of the station suffered hull breaches as stray weapons fire punched through walls never designed to withstand combat. Atmospheric pressure failures killed dozens before emergency bulkheads sealed. The turning point came when Allied forces captured the drum section, gaining control of the station's life support and power distribution. Free Navy forces in other sections suddenly found themselves without air, water, or electrical power. The choice became surrender or death by asphyxiation. Most chose surrender, though some hardliners fought until life support failure rendered them unconscious. With Medina recaptured, the question
became who would control it going forward. The old OPA structure that had initially claimed the station no longer existed in meaningful form. The Free Navy had discredited itself through war crimes and genocidal actions against Earth. Earth itself was devastated, struggling to feed its surviving population and lacking the resources to administer distant stations. Mars was turning inward, focusing on its own economic transformation as the gate network made terraforming seem less urgent. The solution emerged through necessity rather than ideal planning. The Transport Union, initially formed as a coalition of shipping interests seeking to coordinate transit through the gates, gradually assumed control of Medina and the broader gate network. The Union was explicitly non-governmental, not answerable to Earth, Mars, or any belt faction. Its authority derived from practical necessity. Someone needed to manage gate traffic, and the Transport Union was willing and capable. Kamina Drummer, having fought for Medina multiple times and lost more friends than she could count in its defense, eventually became president of the Transport Union. Her leadership brought stability to an organization that might otherwise have fragmented along political lines. She understood both the belt perspective and the practical necessity of cooperation with Earth and Mars. Under her guidance, the Union developed regulations that were strict but fair, applying to all factions equally. Medina Station itself was rebuilt and expanded under Union administration. Additional docking facilities accommodated the growing traffic through the gates. The drum section was fully restored to its civilian purpose, housing a permanent population that grew into the thousands. Commercial districts developed, serving the needs of transiting crews and permanent residents alike. The station evolved from a military installation back into a way station, but one with much greater capacity and sophistication than before. The station's population became genuinely cosmopolitan in ways the solar system had never quite achieved. Workers came from Earth, Mars, the Belt, and increasingly from newly established colonies beyond the gates. Belter Creole mixed with languages from a dozen Earth nations and several Martian dialect variations. Cultural practices from across humanity mingled in the station's social spaces. Religious services catered to Mormon descendants who felt proprietary pride in the station's origins, alongside Buddhist, Muslim, Christian, Hindu, and secular humanist communities. Children born on Medina grew up with a unique perspective. They lived on a station built as a generation ship, converted to a warship, transformed into a way station, existing in a pocket dimension outside normal space, serving as the gateway to 1,300 different star systems. Their playground was an artifact of alien technology. Their daily routine involved watching ships arrive from worlds their parents had never imagined visiting. They were, in a very real sense, the first truly post-solar system generation, children of the gates rather than children of Earth, Mars, or the Belt. Comparative analysis and interconnections. Looking at Ceres, Tycho, and Medina together reveals patterns in how humanity adapted to life beyond Earth. Each station represents a different approach to the fundamental challenges of space habitation, and each reflects different aspects of the political and social tensions that shaped the Expanse's universe. Ceres Station, carved from an existing asteroid and spun up to provide artificial gravity, represents humanity's first large-scale colonization of the Belt. It's a modified natural object, using what was already present rather than building entirely from scratch. This reflects the pragmatic, resource-constrained approach that defined early belt development. When you don't have abundant materials or energy to spare, you work with what exists. The dwarf planet Ceres offered water, minerals, and sufficient mass to make modification worthwhile. The social stratification on Ceres, with wealthy districts near the surface and poverty deeper in the rock, mirrors Earth's own divisions but with space-specific variations. On Earth, elevation often correlates with wealth, penthouse apartments and hilltop mansions versus crowded lowlands. On Ceres, the dynamic is similar but inverted. Close-core surface means stronger gravity and less Coriolis effect, making it more desirable. The parallel isn't coincidental. Humans carry their hierarchies wherever they go, adapting them to local conditions but maintaining the fundamental structures of inequality. Ceres' role as the belt's primary port made it economically indispensable, but politically vulnerable. Every faction that wanted to control the belt needed to control Ceres, or at least prevent rivals from doing so. This made the station a perpetual focus of conflict, from Star Helix's security operations to the riots after the Canterbury's destruction, to the eventual transition to OPA control. The station's importance exceeded its defensive capabilities, creating a situation where political dynamics mattered more than military strength. Tycho Station represents a fundamentally different approach. Rather than modifying existing celestial bodies, Tycho was built entirely from manufactured components. It's artificial top to bottom, designed specifically for its purpose rather than adapted from something else. This reflects a later stage of space development, when humanity possessed both the resources and the expertise to construct whatever facilities were needed. Tycho's mobility distinguishes it from traditional stations. Most habitats are fixed to asteroids or orbital positions. Tycho can relocate itself anywhere in the belt, repositioning based on where its capabilities are needed most. This mobility has strategic implications. A station that can move can't be easily blockaded or besieged. It can evade threats, position itself near allies, and generally maintain autonomy in ways that fixed installations cannot. The station's role as both legitimate shipyard and covert OPA headquarters illustrates the complexity of belt politics. Fred Johnson ran Tycho as a business, maintaining relationships with Earth and Mars governments, completing civilian contracts, and projecting an image of responsible corporate operations. Simultaneously, he used the station's resources to build the OPA Navy, coordinate resistance operations, and work toward belt independence. This duality was possible only because of Tycho's capabilities. A smaller station couldn't hide military operations behind civilian cover. A fixed station couldn't evade inspection by suspicious interplanet authorities. The comparison between Ceres and Tycho reveals different visions of belt identity. Ceres represents the belt as it is, rough, unequal, populated by workers struggling for survival under harsh conditions. It's authentic in its poverty and its resilience. Tycho represents the belt as it could be, technologically advanced, self-sufficient, capable of matching inter-planet capabilities. The tension between these visions, between accepting the belt's current reality and striving for transformation, underlies much of the OPA's internal conflicts.
Medina Station's origin story sets it apart from both Ceres and Tycho. It wasn't designed as a station at all, but as a generation ship, later converted to a warship, and only finally transformed into the way station it ultimately became. Each transformation reflected changing priorities and circumstances. The Mormon Church's theological vision gave way to the OPA's military ambitions, which gave way to humanity's practical need for infrastructure to manage gate traffic. This evolution mirrors humanity's own journey in the Expanse. The species began with grand visions, terraforming Mars, colonizing the belt, building generation ships to distant stars. Reality complicated these visions. Mars's terraforming project consumed centuries and remained incomplete. The belt became a site of exploitation rather than promised prosperity. The generation ship never launched on its intended mission. Yet from these compromised visions, something functional emerged. Mars became a military and technological power despite its incomplete terraforming. The belt developed a distinct identity and eventually gained autonomy. The generation ship became the gateway to 1,300 new worlds. Medina's location in the slow zone, that alien pocket dimension beyond normal space, gives it unique characteristics that neither Ceres nor Tycho share. The station exists in a space where human physics don't fully apply, where speed limits are enforced by ancient alien technology, where a false sun illuminates a bubble of reality surrounded by unknowable dimensions. Living on Medina means constant awareness that you're not in normal space, that the walls between you and the void are thinner and stranger than anywhere else humans have settled. This alien environment affects the station's culture in subtle ways. Medina residents develop a particular kind of fatalism, an acceptance that they live at the mercy of technology they don't understand and can't control. If the ring station decided to stop functioning, Medina would become a tomb, isolated in alien space with no way to reach any of the 1,300 worlds the gates connect. This existential vulnerability creates a culture distinct from Ceres's working-class grittiness or Tycho's engineering pride. The economic relationships among the three stations reveal how belt infrastructure developed and evolved. Ceres served as the primary market and population center, the place where workers lived and goods were bought and sold. Tycho provided manufacturing capabilities, building ships and stations that expanded belt capabilities. Medina, once operational, became the choke point through which all interstellar commerce passed, generating revenue that flowed back through the belt economy. These stations depended on each other despite their different functions and political allegiances. Ceres needed ships built at Tycho to maintain its trade networks. Tycho needed Ceres's population as a labor pool and market for finished vessels. Medina needed both Ceres and Tycho to supply the goods and services transiting ships required. When the Free Navy conflict disrupted these relationships, all three stations suffered. Economic interdependence proved stronger than political divisions, eventually pushing factions toward negotiated settlement rather than perpetual conflict.
The military importance of all three stations made them targets during conflicts, but in different ways. Ceres was valuable for its population and infrastructure, worth capturing but difficult to hold if the population resisted. Attacking Ceres risked martyring 6 million Belters, turning moderates into radicals. Tycho was valuable for its manufacturing capabilities and mobility, making it a priority target, but also difficult to pin down for decisive assault. Medina was strategically essential for controlling the gate network, but its position in the slow zone complicated both attack and defense with physics-defying speed limits. The evolution of these stations tracks the broader narrative arc of the Expanse. Early in the story, Ceres represents the Belt's subjugation, controlled by Earth through star helix and exploited for resources. Tycho exists on the margins, officially neutral, but covertly supporting Belt independence. Medina doesn't exist yet, the ring hasn't appeared, and humanity's concerns remain confined to the solar system. As the story progresses, Ceres becomes a flashpoint for Belt nationalism. The riots following the Canterbury's destruction, the gradual OPA takeover, the transformation from UN protectorate to Belt capital, all reflect growing Belter consciousness and capability. Tycho emerges from the shadows as Fred Johnson openly leads the OPA's moderate faction, attempting to negotiate Belt legitimacy rather than simply demand it through violence. The ring's appearance and Medina's establishment represent a fundamental shift in the story's scope. Conflicts that seemed galaxy-defining when confined to the solar system become provincial disputes over a tiny corner of known space. The 1,300 new worlds dwarf the resources represented by Ceres, Tycho, or any installation in the solar system. The question changes from who controls the Belt to who controls access to these vastly more significant territories. Yet even with this expanded scope, the three stations remain central to humanity's story. Ceres continues as a population center and cultural touchstone for Belt identity. Tycho, relocated to Pallas but retaining its capabilities, builds the infrastructure for interstellar expansion. Medina serves as the gateway every traveler must pass through, making it perhaps the single most strategically important piece of real estate in human-controlled space. The administrative structures that emerged to govern these stations also reveal humanity's political evolution. Ceres transitioned from UN administration to OPA control, but OPA control meant something different than traditional government. Multiple factions claimed authority. None possessed monopoly on legitimate violence, and practical power came from controlling specific functions like water distribution or security, rather than formal political office. Tycho operated under even stranger arrangements. Officially a corporate installation owned by Tycho Manufacturing and Engineering Concern. Actually the covert headquarters of OPA military and intelligence operations, publicly maintaining the fiction of neutrality while privately committed to Belt independence. Fred Johnson's genius was making this contradiction sustainable, balancing competing demands without letting any single faction force him into untenable positions. Medina ultimately fell under Transport Union control, a quasi-governmental organization that claimed authority based on practical necessity rather than democratic legitimacy or military conquest. The Union's power came from providing essential services, managing gate traffic, maintaining infrastructure that everyone needed but nobody else was capable of operating. This represented a genuinely new form of governance, neither traditional state authority nor corporate power, but something emerging from the unique circumstances of interstellar commerce. The personnel who staffed these stations also demonstrate interesting patterns. Ceres' population was primarily Belter, though with Earth-born administrators and Mars-trained security forces creating multicultural tensions. Tycho employed more mixed crews by necessity, as its technical sophistication required recruiting specialists from wherever they could be found. Medina's staff became the most cosmopolitan, drawing workers from Earth, Mars, the Belt, and increasingly from colonies beyond the gates. These demographic patterns affected station culture in profound ways. Ceres developed a distinctly Belter identity, with Langbelta dominating conversation and social norms reflecting Belt working-class values. Tycho maintained more formal, almost military culture, despite its civilian cover, reflecting both OPA organizational style and the precision required for shipbuilding operations. Medina evolved a frontier culture, mixing traditions from across humanity with the shared experience of living in alien space. Family structures on each station adapted to local circumstances. Ceres families often spanned generations, with children born and raised in the same tunnels their grandparents had excavated. Extended kinship networks provided social support that formal institutions couldn't offer. Tycho's mobile population made long-term family formation difficult, leading to more temporary arrangements and higher rates of single-person households. Medina, as the newest station, was still developing family patterns, with early residents often leaving children with relatives at other stations rather than raising them in the uncertain environment of the slow zone. Educational systems reflected each station's priorities and resources. Ceres offered basic education focused on practical skills, literacy, mathematics, and training for industrial work. Advanced education required leaving the station, either for schools on Luna or Mars, or for the very few Earth universities. Tycho provided technical training as part of employment, apprenticeship programs that taught shipbuilding and station maintenance. Medina's schools, still developing, focused on preparing children for life in a cosmopolitan interstellar society, teaching multiple languages and cultural competencies alongside traditional subjects. Healthcare availability varied dramatically. Ceres' lower levels had minimal medical facilities, with residents relying on traditional remedies, black market pharmaceuticals, and acceptance of conditions that would be routinely treated on Earth or Mars. The upper levels had better access, though still limited compared to inter-planet standards. Tycho maintained industrial medical facilities capable of handling workplace injuries and basic illnesses, but referred serious cases to larger stations. Medina developed more sophisticated healthcare infrastructure over time, partly because the station's strategic importance justified investment, partly because the transport union could afford better services than the cash-strapped OPA. Religious and cultural practices on each station reflected their population's diversity. Ceres featured small chapels, temples, and mosques tucked into converted storage spaces, serving communities that maintained Earth religious traditions despite never having seen their religion's holy places. Secular humanism was perhaps more common, a practical philosophy that matched the harsh realities of belt life. Tycho's culture was less overtly religious, though OPA ideology carried quasi-religious elements in its emphasis on belt identity and destiny. Medina, built from a Mormon generation ship, retained memorial spaces acknowledging that origin, while developing into a genuinely pluralistic environment where practitioners of dozens of traditions coexisted. The technological sophistication required to maintain each station created dependencies that shaped political possibilities. Ceres needed constant imports of water, air filtration systems, and fusion reactor fuel. Any faction controlling these supply chains could effectively control Ceres, regardless of who nominally governed the station. Tycho's mobile capabilities required maintaining complex drive systems and navigation equipment that few personnel could repair or replace. Medina depended on understanding and working with alien technology that nobody fully comprehended, creating reliance on the small number of specialists who'd developed any expertise with ring station systems. These technological dependencies created a class of specialists with disproportionate power. Engineers who understood fusion reactors, technicians who could repair life support systems, pilots capable of navigating the slow zone's unique physics, all possessed skills that made them nearly irreplaceable. This gave them leverage in negotiations over working conditions, compensation, and political arrangements. The most successful station administrators recognized this and treated technical specialists as partners rather than employees, creating consultation structures that gave them voice in decisions affecting the station. Conclusion: the architecture of humanity's future. As we drift toward the end of our journey through these three remarkable stations, it's worth reflecting on what they represent in the broader context of the Expanse and humanity's expansion beyond Earth. These aren't just settings or background elements. They're characters in their own right, shaping the people who live within them and the conflicts that define the story. Ceres Station stands as testament to human adaptability and resilience. Taking a lifeless rock, drifting through the void, and transforming it into home for 6 million people required engineering audacity, sustained investment, and the willingness of those millions to build lives in an environment fundamentally hostile to human existence. Every breath of air is manufactured, every drop of water precious, every cubic meter of habitable space carved from ice and stone through human labor. Yet people don't just survive on Ceres. They thrive. They raise families, build businesses, create art, fall in love, and fight for their communities. The station proves that humanity can make home anywhere,
given sufficient determination and resources. But Ceres also demonstrates the persistence of inequality and exploitation,
even in the most challenging environments. The division between upper and lower levels, between those who have water and those who ration every drop, between Star Helix officers and the belters they police. All these hierarchies reproduce Earth's divisions in microcosm. The Belt's independence movement grew from recognition that simply leaving Earth doesn't mean leaving behind the structures that create poverty and oppression. New worlds require new social arrangements, or they simply export old problems to new locations. Tycho Station represents technological mastery and the power that comes from controlling means of production. The ability to build ships, to manufacture the vessels that move goods and people through space, gives Tycho importance beyond its population or physical size. Fred Johnson understood this, using Tycho's capabilities to build OPA military power while maintaining the station's cover as civilian shipyard. The station's mobility added another layer of security, allowing it to evade threats that would overwhelm fixed installations. Yet Tycho's fate also demonstrates the limits of technological power. The station fell to the Free Navy not through direct assault, overwhelming its defenses, but through internal betrayal, exploiting its vulnerabilities. No amount of engineering sophistication could protect against human treachery. Johnson's assassination represented the loss of something irreplaceable: expertise and relationships that couldn't be rebuilt quickly. Kamina Drummer proved capable of leading Tycho after Johnson's death, but she led a different organization with different priorities, reflecting changed circumstances rather than Johnson's original vision. Medina Station embodies both hope and caution about humanity's future. The gateway to 1,300 new worlds, standing sentinel in alien space, maintaining infrastructure that makes interstellar expansion possible. Medina represents humanity's greatest opportunity since leaving Earth for space. The sheer scale of possibility, the number of potential new homes, the resources waiting to be discovered, all suggest humanity might finally transcend the zero-sum conflicts that have defined its history. But Medina's story also warns against optimism unburdened by realism. The station changed hands multiple times through military conflict. The Free Navy's control demonstrated that expanded possibilities don't eliminate human capacity for violence and exploitation. Even after Transport Union administration brought stability, Medina remained a choke point where power could be exercised over all interstellar commerce. The question of who controls the gateway and for whose benefit persists, despite the abundance the gate network theoretically provides. Together, these three stations map humanity's journey from Earth-dominated solar system to galaxy-spanning civilization. Ceres represents the first generation of belt colonization, when Earth still controlled and exploited the outer planets. Tycho represents the next phase, when belt capabilities grew to challenge inner-planet dominance. Medina represents the ongoing phase, when humanity's scope expands beyond the solar system entirely, creating both new opportunities and new versions of old conflicts. The people who built, maintained, and fought over these stations deserve recognition. The workers who carved tunnels through Ceres' ice, risking their lives in industrial accidents and equipment failures. The engineers who designed Tycho's systems, solving problems that had never been solved before. The soldiers who died defending Medina from forces that would have used it to oppress rather than liberate. Their individual names are mostly lost to history, but their collective achievement persists in the stations themselves. Walking through these stations in imagination, we can almost feel the low gravity of Ceres' lower levels, the Coriolis effect pulling us sideways as we move through corridors that curve up at the horizon. We can picture Tycho's construction sphere, the massive Waldos moving ship sections with impossible precision, while workers in vacuum suits swarm over the assembly. We can envision Medina's drum section rotating to provide gravity, with windows looking out at the slow zone's false sun, and the ring station beyond, that mysterious alien artifact that makes all of this possible. The Expanse presents us with a future that feels achievable, not in the details perhaps, but in the fundamental approach. This is humanity expanding into space without magic technology to solve basic problems. Gravity remains a challenge, addressed through rotation or constant acceleration. Water remains precious, air manufactured, and radiation dangerous. People still need to eat, sleep, and breathe. They still form families, create communities, and fight over resources and ideology. The stations they build are magnificent achievements, but they're achievements of human engineering rather than inexplicable alien gifts. This grounded approach to science fiction makes the stations feel real in ways that many space habitats in fiction don't. We can imagine the calculations that went into spinning up Ceres, the trade-offs between artificial gravity strength and rotational stress on the asteroid's structure. We can picture the project managers at Tycho dealing with construction delays and budget overruns while building the Nauvoo. We can visualize the bureaucrats at Medina trying to write traffic regulations for space where normal physics don't apply. These stations also remind us that infrastructure shapes society in profound ways. The layout of Ceres, with its stratified levels, literally embeds inequality into the station's architecture. Tycho's mobile design enables political autonomy that fixed stations cannot achieve. Medina's position in the slow zone makes it the unavoidable choke point for all interstellar travel, creating power that comes from geography rather than military force or political legitimacy. As humanity looks toward actual expansion beyond Earth, the lessons from these fictional stations remain relevant. We will need to address how communities govern themselves when far from Earth's authority. We will need to decide how to allocate scarce resources like water and air among populations that can't survive without them. We will need to build infrastructure that serves everyone, rather than just the wealthy or powerful. we will need to create cultures that can sustain themselves across generations in environments that remain fundamentally hostile to human life. The Expanse doesn't claim to have all the answers to these questions. It presents scenarios, explores consequences, and demonstrates both the triumphs and catastrophes that can emerge from different choices. Ceres shows us that exploitation can persist despite technological advancement. Tycho demonstrates that capability and ideology don't always align neatly. Medina proves that new opportunities don't automatically resolve old conflicts. But running through all three stations' stories is a thread of hope. Not naive optimism, but the stubborn human refusal to accept limitations. People look at a lifeless rock and see a future home. They design generation ships for century-long journeys to distant stars. They build massive construction platforms that can move themselves across the solar system. They take what was meant to be a warship and transform it into a gateway for all humanity. This persistent ingenuity, this determination to build better futures despite obstacles, defines these stations as much as their engineering specifications. The stations matter not just because of what they are, but because of what they represent. They're proof that humanity can survive and thrive beyond Earth. They're demonstrations of what becomes possible when engineering capability combines with collective will. They're warnings about how old injustices persist in new environments unless consciously addressed. They're invitations to imagine ourselves living in these spaces, breathing recycled air, drinking reclaimed water, looking out at stars from corridors carved through ice. As you drift off toward sleep tonight, imagine yourself walking through Ceres' lower levels, the narrow corridors curving upward, the smell of too many people in too little space, the distant vibration of industrial machinery that never stops. Or picture yourself at a viewing window on Tycho, watching the Waldos position hull sections for a new vessel under construction. Or stand in Medina's observation deck, looking out at the false sun of the slow zone, knowing that beyond the ring station wait 1,300 different worlds, each with its own possibilities and dangers. These stations exist in fiction, but they represent real questions about humanity's future. How will we govern ourselves when Earth is too far away to matter? How will we maintain our humanity when the environments we inhabit are utterly alien? How will we avoid repeating the mistakes that have caused so much suffering on Earth? The Expanse doesn't offer simple answers, but it does offer stories worth contemplating as we plan our own expansion into space. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the stations that shaped the Expanse's universe, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Cryo Bay Logs. We've got plenty more explorations of science fiction's most fascinating locations, technologies, and ideas coming your way. Drop a comment letting me know which station you'd most want to visit, or what other aspects of the Expanse you'd like us to explore in future videos. Until next time, may your air stay fresh, your water stay clean, and your trajectory stay true. This is Cryo Bay Logs, signing off from the void between worlds, where humanity builds its future, one station at a time. Sleep well and dream of the stars.